Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Odd Tandem. Yes, you know that we've changed our name because you're listening, but make sure to spread the word to your friends that we're back, Yenzi.
We are back, and we try to be back, bigger and better. So we have more episodes per month with some extra features. We still have super interesting guests. We will still talk about everything related to cycling, but we just try to be better and more fascinating than we were before. So yes, please share the love and share the knowledge with your friends about the odd tandem, Bobby and Jens.
And that we are an odd tandem, aren't we, Yenzi? You know,
Kidding.
Been friends a long time, but yep, you know, I think you're on the front of the tandem. I'm on the back because, you know, you were always that guy in the front going in breakaways with that game face, and I was always kind of crystal cranking in the back. So if we ever get some pod art made, you know, it's got to be you on the front with your game face and me on the back just, I don't know, reading a book or eating some carbohydrates in the background. But anyway, so today we have a fantastic guest. You may not know his name, but anyone that's been involved in cycling and especially sports science, data science for the last decade plus knows his name. So give a big odd tandem welcome to Robby Ketchell. All right, everyone, special treat today. Robby Ketchell, welcome to the Odd Tandem.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love the name, by the way.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, we went through quite a few names. There's no doubt about it. But who would you have on the back of your odd tandem? Do you have anyone in your life that, like Jens and I, that are just totally opposite, but it just kind of clicks for you and that person?
Oh, well, I obviously have my son because he's the one that actually pushes me to move. So, you know, otherwise I wouldn't be on the bike. I'd probably have him with me.
How old is he? How hard can he push you? Or you have to carry him around? Or is he your little turbo engine?
He's 6, but he's a superhero, you know? So he can fire that thing up, you know?
Yeah. You moved the camera a little bit, but let's see the shirt. Actually,
baby. We just had a walk for Wyatt. So, all right, you know, Wyatt has Down syndrome, and my wife started the first ever Seacoast Best Buddies Friendship Walk here in Exeter, New Hampshire. And so this was the second year running. And so Wyatt has his own team. It's called Wyatt's Warriors, where we just have fundraising for Best Buddies. And we just got done with that on Saturday.
Cool. Well, you know, to our listeners that may not know your name, I mean, you are an absolute legend in the sport of cycling. You kind of started the whole sports science phase. So tell us and our listeners a little bit about your educational background and how you got involved with the sport of cycling in the first place, Robby.
I'll actually start a little bit on my passion for the sport. So I grew up a bike racer. I wanted to be like you guys. I started bike racing when I was 12 years old because I blew out my knee and I couldn't do any of the fun sports like soccer and football because back then they didn't repair the ACL on a 12-year-old. And my parents bought me a bike. In that year, when I was 12, my dad drove me from upstate New York to Wichita Falls, Texas. I think it was like a 3-day drive to go do the junior national championships. And I sucked so bad that I got dropped on the first lap. So my dad drove me 3 days to come to this thing, and I just got absolutely shot out the back of a bunch of 11 and 12-year-olds. But from that day, I was hooked, and I raced my bike until I was about 25 years old, trying to make it a career. I think I once made $500 in a year racing my bike. I mean, I did my best, but it wasn't my thing. It wasn't meant to be, I guess. And so that was always the connection with cycling. I was a computer science and engineer and had been working in a lab at Colorado State in Fort Collins. And there was, so I was in grad school there, and there was a wind tunnel. and there was a training company, and two of them came together, and the wind tunnel had nothing to do with cycling or sports. And the training company basically wanted to, I think it was called Colorado Premier Training at the time. They wanted to do wind tunnel testing there because wind tunnel testing was just starting to become like the cool thing. San Diego, there was a wind tunnel out in San Diego, and there were a bunch in Europe, and they were creating these cycling test balance, and so I got to be part of a team that built the software and the testing balance for that wind tunnel in Colorado, in Fort Collins. And this thing, just so you know, was like the most retro wind tunnel of all time. It was made out of plywood. It looked like a cardboard box because it wasn't meant to be like a Formula One type of sexy aero type of thing. It was used for gas dispersion modeling, and so nobody really went in there. They would run the wind tunnel like all night on these little tiny buildings to look at how from health science buildings, the fumes, whether they went into a sidewalk and like things like that. And we built a balance that went in this thing, and the balance set off the floor by like 4 feet. So you had to rock climb yourself up to this thing and to get on the testing balance. And it was, looking back at it, like it was the least safe thing that you could put like any person on at all time. And the wind tunnel didn't turn off either. So like in between testing, you literally, the wind's going 30 miles an hour, 50K an hour, and you would have to take a bike with a disc wheel out the door perpendicular to the wind, and hold on to this thing to go and like mount it up there. And long story short, it was Slipstream Sports that was, I believe it was Garmin Slipstream at the time, the name of the team. And they were based out of Boulder, which was an hour south of us. And they booked 100 hours in the wind tunnel that year. And that's how I got connected.
Back in that days, my very first wind tunnel testing was still in East Germany. I was just 18 years old, like maybe a year before the wall came down. And they used the stuff, they made candles of paraffin? Is that the word? They would like heat it up so it would become smoke, and then
it's like an oil-based. It's an oil-based.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yes.
You did the same thing, so you could like visualize the airflow.
Yes,
you did the same thing.
Yes, we did it. Except for the things that we had were they used that all the time for the gas dispersion modeling, because that's what they would do to simulate the flow. Mm-hmm. They would take videos of like flow coming out of exhausts from buildings, and these buildings, by the way, they were a couple inches tall type of thing. And they would, and so you would look at the flow over that. And so we had these like retrofitted things that were meant for the gas dispersion modeling, and we would put it over the cyclists, and you could see the flow over it. And, most of the time we would like run out of things to test with people. So we would be like, look at the smoke. We can put it around and show you like how it is and try to educate, how aerodynamics worked. Yeah.
Okay, so that was one of the things that I had on my list, but you're kind of responsible, or maybe fully responsible, for quite a few other innovations. And I had to lean on Christian Vaneveld, our old buddy Christian, and he kind of went down a list. What other products or technology did you help kind of bring into the world of cycling that is pretty standard now? I have two that I know of. The helmet, the Giro helmet that you made, evidently pulled an all-nighter at training camp and like filed down the long tail to be like
only Christian knows that story.
That stubby look that is now pretty much a norm. And the old famous, what was that called? The bat suit or the squirrel suit, the time trial suit.
Yes.
Tell us how you came up with these ideas. I mean, it was over a decade and a half ago, but you were kind of like on the right track where now it's just the norm.
Yeah, it's funny. I forgot about that story with Christian. So just to give a little bit of background to this. So when I started working in the wind tunnel, this is before I was hired by the team. We were working with the team, but they came to our wind tunnel. And I basically had free reign to go in and run the wind tunnel in the middle of the night, because remember, what kept the lights on at that wind tunnel was doing all this gas dispersion modeling. And so doing the cycling testing was kind of an inconvenience to them, because they would have to change out the balances and everything. And so it was like at 5, I'd have a key to the door. It was like 5 o'clock that the normal staff would leave for the day. And I would go into this warehouse, and I would have to turn the big breaker switch down and turn on the fan, and like the wind would come up, and I would be able to study things in there. And I had like foam that I would sand down with like sandpaper. I had like these foam cutters that's like this hot wire, and I would cut like different shapes, and I was making things like that went at the bottom of the shoes that went around the cleats and like the pedals. I was testing like different helmet shapes and stuff like that. And so I was fortunate to have like a resource where I had endless amount of time in the middle of the night. Like I could go all the way until 9 a.m. if I wanted to, with just running the wind tunnel and testing things. And by the way, there was a lot of foam that just kind of flew back into the fan because a lot of stuff got lost during that time. But it was at a training camp with Christian. I think Christian had broken his collarbone in the Giro that year. We were trying to get him ready for... So I fast forward, I was hired by the team away from the wind tunnel, and this is like the first training camp that I ever went to. So the team, like all the resources were at the Giro still. And they were like, okay, we need to put Christian at altitude, or somewhere where he can recover but also kind of get back into the swing of things. And they're like, hey Robby, do you want to go drive the car behind him and like support him and do things? And so I had so much time to watch Christian ride his bike and see him in his TT position and just be like, hey, we should be doing some aero stuff while we're here. And so I took his TT helmet. I went to the warehouse, or the hardware store, and bought a hacksaw. Got some of, I think it's called Fapos foam over in Spain, and cut off the tail of his TT helmet, and sanded down glued on this big foam block and just sanded it down, just like arts and craft project. Then he would go ride the next day in that, and he'd be like, how'd I look? And I would just give some feedback, and that's how that kind of stubby tail TT helmet kind of came to place. It was that year that Pearl Izumi was the sponsor, and there was an intern at Pearl Izumi that used to come up and spend time in the wind tunnel with me in the middle of the night. And we were trying to design a new speed suit for the tour that we could do. And we went pretty overboard with the wings underneath the armpits that year, to so much that it kind of restricted the guys from putting their arms out in certain positions. I think there's a picture of Ryder Hesjedal where he's not really in his aero position because he was over 40K. It was like pulling him back quite a bit. But yeah, that's how those came about.
So for my understanding and our listeners and viewers, at the start you said you were into data analysis and computers. How did you make the transition to become an aerodynamics expert? Self-teaching, or you did more studies to cover that base? Or how did you change from being in an office at a computer to the wind tunnel and be like doing practical work out there in the field?
Yeah, great question. I mean, obviously aerodynamics with cycling was something that I knew a lot about because I was a cyclist, right? And we're all aware of the effect of aerodynamics. I had studied fluid dynamics in college and gone through the engineering courses for that those subjects. However, had never done wind tunnel testing until we had built that wind tunnel testing balance in Colorado. And it was, I would say, through hundreds of hours of just kind of being able to study aerodynamics as it relates to a cyclist that it became kind of a specialty for me. And it became a lab. It became like, a lot of times as scientists, like you go to a new lab and you're studying new concepts and stuff, and the same scientific principles apply in the sense that you need to set up your different tests that you're going to do, how you're going to test them, and then you back into the science around that. And keep in mind that aerodynamics is a pretty heavy computational field. There is computational fluid dynamics has been around. That's what we used in the marathon project more recently. Completely, we barely did any wind tunnel testing, and that's all computer simulation. And that's kind of what I'm working on now, are some alternatives to aero testing, because keep in mind, like, wind tunnel testing, as you guys know, is it's a big inconvenience to bring an athlete to a wind tunnel, especially when you're trying to do altitude camps and you're trying to do all kinds of other things. And that's what led to the bat box, Bobby. I don't know if that was on a list by Christian, but I built hand soldered together dynamic pressure sensors that were like pitot tubes, essentially, that were on a circuit board with a microprocessor that measured the wind speed and wind direction on a bike. So these things didn't exist. You see, these sensors are out there now, and this was back in 2012, I believe, that I created the Bat Box. And the Bat Box sat on a bike, and the reason that I created it for guys like Christian and David Miller and all the guys on the Slipstream team at the time, because it was so hard to get them to a wind tunnel. And the reason I bring that up, Jens, is because the wind tunnel and the aerodynamics is one thing around it, but there's so many challenges to being able to kind of study that on a cyclist and have it applied to specifically, our sport.
In the period that you were starting to think like this and you were coming up with these amazing ideas, a lot of it had to have been trial and error.
Oh, yeah.
So, we've talked about some things that are, entrenched in cycling now, but what are some of those things, maybe those projects that didn't quite get off the ground that you were working on way back then? There had to have been some crazy idea that you had that.
Yeah. I had gotten into the professional teams through being an expert in aerodynamics. However, because it was so logistically challenging to do aerodynamic testing, there was so much limited time that we actually did the aero testing. So I had to apply other things, and like things around biomechanics, things around physiology, things around nutrition and stuff, and kind of, be a sports scientist. And data scientist was not even really a term at that time, right? And I was really keen on being able to come up with some analytics platforms, and nobody was really doing true analytics, and AI wasn't even like something that you heard. And I created a software application called Platypus. And Platypus was, as far as I know, the first AI system that any pro team used in the peloton. And this application was essentially, I had to solve for the fact that when you're like Team Sky or your CSC, like when you guys had the yellow jersey in the tour, like you always had the frontmost car position, right? And like you knew more what was going on in the race, especially back then with radio communication. I don't even know if it's any better today, but like it's always a problem, right? It's always a problem in the caravan. But if you're like 20th car or like 15th car, you have no idea what's going on. Like you really have no idea what's going on because you're not in the race. A lot of times, like I had the luxury of being able to drive the car every once in a while in smaller races. Sometimes you just kind of go up there like, oh, I thought we had a rider back here, just because you're bored. And what I did was I created this application that was gathering social Twitter. Was starting to become really popular at this time. And I created this application that was scraping Twitter data, and we basically would gather all the information that was mentioned about our riders. And then I would take it and I had this truth like validity algorithm around it, and it would basically try to indicate in an appropriate time, like, hey, did we have a rider that flatted so that they could hear it before? Or, hey, do we have riders that are hanging at the back of the peloton and don't look good, like at the bottom of a climb, like they're starting to sag or something like that? And it gave the directors, Charlie Wigilius was the one that was using it at the time, gave them more information. It didn't completely remove the radio, but it was supplemental. But the challenge was the connectivity of the service, like for Wi-Fi and cellular networks, were such a challenge that there was limited time that I could send information to them. And so I would have like pre-programmed like information that would so I would only send like a signal of like the number 1, and that would tell them rider at the back, or that would tell them like, we're all at the front or something like that, because the smaller the data packet, the easier it was to send it to them at the time. And so we had to now you have things like Starlink and like all these different like satellite internet services that would probably make an application like that super useful. But that's something that like we tried and was hard to not really take it. And the riders got pretty frustrated, I think, because I was driving ahead of the race to go to the hotel, where I could watch the TV too, by the way, and be able to also add information into this and send it to them. But instead of being on the side of the road, like handing bottles or like doing something that was like more urgent, maybe like that they felt. And so it didn't take off. And I think in today's age, it had more of an opportunity, but the cellular networks were the limiter there. Another example of something that was a success, but almost wasn't a success. If you look at those stubby helmets that came out, and it was 2011 that we introduced them, we had put a big focus on trying to win the team time trial at the Tour. We had never won a stage in the Tour with Slipstream, and we were like, all right, team time trial, like nobody focuses on the team time trial. Let's go win that. And we didn't take Johan Van Summeren, who had won Paris-Roubaix, to the Tour that year, and that was a pretty big deal that we didn't make that decision, and we had taken, we had taken some young riders that were kind of people, even the media was like, really, this is going to be the team. We had Tor Hushoff, we had Christian, we had David Miller, we had Dave Zabriskie, so we had like a pretty like top hitter TT team, and we bring these helmets there. We had never used them yet. Because we were trying to keep them kind of secret. And I laugh about this because now the ability to create like prototypes is so much greater than it was in 2011. But like we bring this to the race, and they had never really worn them before, which is always a mistake, right? But we also were kind of up against a timeline to bring them there. And we put them on the riders to go do like the pre-ride of the course. Christian comes back to me and he throws the helmet at me and he goes, "That helmet sucks. I can't wear it." Like the shell came disconnected from like the protective layer inside. It was like going over his eyes and he couldn't see. And he goes, "Just give me the other helmet for the team time trial." And keep in mind this is like hour and a half until start time. And I looked at him on the side, and he didn't know, but we had sent the old helmets back to the service course that morning, so the old helmets weren't there, right? So I go into the truck, and I don't tell him this because I'm like, I gotta go find a solution, right? I can't go with him with the problem, and he's at this point he's on the trainer like warming up with the rest of the team, and he's seen me walk by like a million times, and he's like, "You got the other helmet?" And I'm like, And so I like go into the truck, the mechanic's truck. I get some super glue, right? And I'm trying to glue this thing on. And then it's me and one of the soigneurs are trying to like, hand dry the thing. We couldn't even find a fan. And we're like, okay, cool. We got to go show him that we fixed it. So we go to give it to him. Super glue hadn't dried. So he puts it on. His eyes burn. And he's just like crying inside this helmet. He takes it off, and now he's getting a little irritated for good reason, right? And so he's like, give me the old helmet. And I'm like, uh-huh. So I go into the truck and I'm like, okay, last chance. He was a small helmet and we had a medium. And I bring him the medium and I'm like, hey, try this on. This is probably a good idea. And he puts it on. He's like, oh yeah, I guess I'm a medium. And that was like 5 minutes before the start, and they like roll off to go to the start. And I was driving third car that day. Because in the team time trial, you can have 3 cars, right? Or at least it used to be. I don't know anymore. But and we had the plan that Julian Dean was going to pull off after the first kilometer. That was just like the game plan. Like he was just going to go hard right out of the gate, and he was going to pull off and just drop off. It was a short time trial, I think about like 20K or something. So like there was no issue with the time limits. So he pulls off, and being third car, that means that like I just follow Julian, and so I have no idea what's going on in the race. I think I messed everything up with Christian. Like we put everything into the whole season for this, and I have no radio contact because I'm so far away from everybody that I have no connectivity to anything, so I don't know how we're doing. We get back, I park the car. Christian pulls up to me before I even get out of the car, and he goes, "Never do that to me again." It's like, you don't really know what happened there, but got it, right? And so I get out, I see that we're winning, and we had to wait for Sky to finish. I think they were last off or close to last off, and we had beat them by 1 second to win the team time trial, and that was the team's first stage win in the Tour.
Wow, that is pretty dramatic, right? You couldn't write a script more exciting than that. That's pretty awesome. So now that you talked about all these ideas and how cycling has changed in terms of aerodynamics, for example, where or how do you see the next big jump or development? I mean, for the last, let's say, 5 to 8 years, maybe it was nutrition. So what would be the next field of development? Tires, material of the tire, again, aerodynamics, the weight of the bikes, the shape of the frames, or where can we go further and faster now?
Yeah, I truly believe that it's like the circle of life, that as you push one field like nutrition, it actually opens up areas with training or opens up areas with bike position and things that you didn't realize before. And then it starts circling back to the thing, oh, hey, we weren't actually doing that the most optimal way. I think training science with AI and analytics has a really big opportunity. I don't think anybody's truly doing it yet. The platform, it's so hard to build a platform to do it right and provide value. I think that advanced analytics with AI in all kinds of different fields, aerodynamics, training, nutrition, recovery, like all that's just going to start to really boom. The equipment is so interesting because it has to follow the ceiling that the UCI gives it from the regulations, and that's changed so much, right? I mean, you look at how advanced the bikes were back in 2000. And now it's like we went back in time for a number of years with the way that the frames look with the geometry. And you look at like Bjarne Riis's bike, right? When he won the Tour with that Pinarello, like that was really, really advanced stuff. And now you see with the handlebar positions, like what's kind of coming from that now that they're able to have them at a specific angle, and they weren't allowed to do that for a number of years. And so position is always going to evolve because of that stuff. The things that people don't think about, like all the bearing frictions and the different technology that come out with that stuff, and how much of an impact that really has over time for especially with pro cyclists. So it doesn't really answer your question, but I just think that it's going to just continue to cycle through like all these different fields, and there will be continuous innovation.
So basically you say, we develop this pulls up this, then we focus on that pulls up a third part, we focus back on that. So it builds on top of each other.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah, okay. It does.
Yep.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. And a lot of times we think that like we're doing something completely right, and we can't get more advanced with training, or we can't get more advanced with nutrition. But then we're like, oh wait, we've been doing it all wrong. And something that we've done in a different field kind of unlocks that.
Not very often do we have someone like you, who's always the smartest guy in the room on our podcast. So I want to pick your brain a little bit about thermal regulation, about ice bath recovery and heat acclimation, because again, you know, Christian told me that you guys were thinking about that sort of stuff way back in the day. So kind of from when you started to where it is now, what is your opinion of those two things in particular?
Yeah. It was a pretty hot topic for a number of years. Alan Lim, who was basically had my job before me at Slipstream, he started pushing pretty heavily on that, and with things like the Ice Fest. And when I got to the team, we were still considering different ways for thermal regulation, especially for recovery. However, just like any field, like you find something that advances it, like the Ice Fest, and you realize how inconvenient the Ice Fest is, and how like hard it is to like truly prepare, especially when you have team time trials and you got to have like 8 Ice Fests for people, right, for the entire team. And we looked into just ice gloves or using slushies, which is probably the most effective way for cooling cooler body temperature. Because you actually lose most of the heat and the energy through your urine when it leaves your body. And however, there were challenges with that, because when we put a slushy machine in the bus, the bus heated up because it was so hot from running that thing inside the bus. But we literally had like a slushy machine that you would see on like with an ice cream truck or something. That was on the bus, and it was so hard to resource that we only had like one good one, and so there was never one on the second bus and stuff like that. All things that you just think would be so easy to achieve, and maybe in today's age, like there's more ways to resource things. But then we started freezing tights when Ryder Hesjedal won the Giro 2012. We were doing ice tights. And so when he came on the bus after a stage, we would have like leg warmers and arm warmers that had been soaked in water and then put in a freezer. And he would immediately put that on his legs and strip down and put all this stuff, and it would lower his core body temperature and it would accelerate the recovery. That's the recovery piece of it. And it really, he was somebody that adopted that technology too. Like, it really takes a special individual to have that commitment that after, you're absolutely cooked, you're getting on the bus, you're hungry, media wants to talk to you, and you're like, no, I got to go put my ice tights on for 5 minutes. And and he really committed to that year. Now, in terms of like thermal regulation, like, we're getting a little bit outside cycling, but people don't realize when you're drafting, like, it'll really affect your thermal regulation because you don't have the wind over you to cool you, right? And there's a lot to be said about the position that you ride in, the clothing that you wear, and how your body cools. You look at Pogačar during the Giro. You saw him climbing, he had tights on, or he had leg warmers on, right? And he didn't have anything in his arms, and he had something over his neck. And that's the way his body cools effectively, right? He was able to regulate his temperature really effectively at like high intensities with those colder temperatures by dressing like that. I don't think we dress appropriately. I think he's really onto something there. And a lot of times you see people wearing arm warmers, not wearing leg warmers. The other way around, but the legs are the ones that are propelling you up the mountain, right? And so you have to manage, like, not just when you say core body temperature, but you need to address, like, the different muscles and the legs versus the arms and the entire body, the face, like how that effectively cools you. And the thing that I wanted to bring up was when we did the 159 project in Vienna with Eliud Kipchoge for the sub 2-hour marathon. What we didn't realize, we had created this like incredible pacing formation where it literally created aerodynamic lift for him when he was running behind these runners in front of him. And so it was sucking him along essentially. And what we didn't realize though is that affected his ability to cool. And we had to, because we didn't get the start time that we wanted, because they wanted it to have when we were going to have crowds and everything, and we wanted to start at 5 a.m. when it was going to be cooler. We had to tell him to use it as a tool so that if he was overheating, to get out of the pocket of where he was running so that he could, maintain his core body temperature. And so drafting's a big thing about regulating your temperature. And a lot of times you can't choose. Like if you're just holding on for your life on the peloton and you're drafting, like you're going to draft, but you may not understand that like I'm actually overheating and I need more wind on me or, something to be able to manage that effort. I think I've lost a little bit of what the question was, but there's lots of ways to thermoregulate for sure.
I actually believe Formula One cars have the same problem. They keep getting told, go out of the slipstream, get cold air, and go back in the slipstream because their engine, just exactly as you said, the engines are overheating. So now I have a question for you as well, also coming from Formula One. In Formula One, they could basically, with all the data they collected from their own team and what they know about other teams, they can say, okay,
yes,
I believe his tire is going to last 3.5 more laps, and then he's going to do refilling for 7.8 seconds. We either push now or stop now. So now in cycling, do you believe sophisticated or teams with a bigger budget and having resources, they have a computer program, like for example, Pogacar, his team, do they have a computer program that says, okay, Jonas Vingegaard can push 431 watts for 18.7 minutes. If we can hold the same wattage for 19 minutes, we beat him. You think we are down to that they know precisely, looking at the other rider, his body weight, his position, the energy output, how they can beat him in theory at least. Do you think we have programs like that in cycling?
In 2020, so right after the 159, I went back to working for teams, Ineos Grenadiers then. We created software that was called competitor awareness. And we essentially were trying to get to that. The challenge is that you don't have the actual data. Formula One, that data is more commonly shared. So like the metrics on the engines and like things like that. Cycling, it's really hard to get power data. It's becoming like a little bit more commonplace. So you have some data, but you don't have like years of training data. And some of it's on Strava. We were scraping Strava data. We were doing all kinds of stuff on like the riders. But then I wrote code that essentially was determining the watts per kilogram for a rider going uphill for all the competitors, because going uphill is easier to try to calculate because drafting has less of an effect because you're going at slower speeds. And if you know where they're starting from the video, like of the race, and you know what the pitch of the road is because your riders actually went on the same road, right? So you actually have that GPS data, or you had the data before you even went to the race. And you had a rough estimate of what the rider's weight is. Then you can determine what their watts per kilogram is because you can back calculate it from that. And then you can determine like over what distances they can do that, on what pitches they can do that, etc. So I think that there are ways to come up with kind of niche metrics, but holistically, you're still kind of like not able to get all of the data from specific riders. Now, keep in mind, like riders change teams, though.
Exactly. That would be my next question. Yes.
Yeah. And ethically, that data belongs to with GDPR laws and everything, that data belongs to the rider. And however, you've developed models off of that rider. And so like you have like some pretty abstract things that, you know, now like you've learned about that rider. And so, you know, you look at Richard Carapatch and, that was at Sky and then, went to EF, and they know everything about him. You know, they know so much about him. They not just from what his power numbers are and stuff, but they know how he performs in the cold, even without having numbers on it. They just know from experience, like, oh, this is the type of climb that he won't perform well in, or this is the type of finish that he's really going to perform well in because it's punchy and he has a good sprint. You know, things like that, and you learn a lot. I have to say that like cycling is unique in the sense that everybody like thinks that it's so scientific. There's so much art to it still. There's so much art. I mean, the directors are so knowledgeable. You know, they're bike racers have done it for 20 years. You know, they've known, like most guys in the peloton, they still know or raced with. Like, you can supplement that, but that knowledge is so important, you know, and that's why, a computer doesn't direct a race. The director still does. And it's why AI will not take a software engineer's job, right? Because there's still the ability, you still have to be able to direct the tools. And so I think we get lost in the fact that we think that like technology is free. These guys have these, you know, helmets on that looks like spaceships. With Visma Lisa Bike, who came out with those Giro helmets this year, and like they now we're going to have windshields in front of the bike, and everybody makes all these comments, but they don't realize that when you have a specialized tool like that, you also need to use it effectively. And those riders, like the engineers spent years developing it, and then the riders they have to learn how to use it effectively. I watch them ride in it. I'm like, they're not using it right. Like they're going to, and they're going to get big gains out of it, but their heads up like half the time because they're trying to use a helmet that's specific for going fast in an aero position at high speeds, and they're using it on a prologue course that has 50 turns in it, and they got to look up, you know. And so it's like it's hard to apply the analytics that you're talking about with like the competitor awareness, like all that stuff. There's so much art in it still.
Man, I'm glad that you said that because you know, I look back at the data science that we had back when we were racing, and I wish we had more. But then I'm looking at all the data points that are available to guys and gals out there now, and I kind of feel sorry for them that there's so many data streams that they have to think about, because what you just said is spot on. The riders have to learn how to use it and use it correctly, and that takes a specific type of rider, like you mentioned before, somebody that's very open to that. And if you're just piling this on these younger and younger pros, because let's face it, they're coming into the peloton at 18 now and expected to be winning pretty much right away. You know, this gives such like a neural load to these poor kids that there's so many things that they have to think about that it just makes me a little bit nervous that that artistic side that you also mentioned, you know, that tactical side, that you know, put it all on the line side is going to be affected by some of this data, because, you know, a rider, you know, certain riders are racers, right? Like they go when they feel like going. And we've seen that a lot with Philippe Gilbert was one of the best examples of that. Tadej Pogačar is obviously a prime example, but like if you're having that artistic tactical flow being overridden by a person in the car saying, oh, this sensor says this, or this calculation says this, or is it taking the fun out of our sport a little bit?
Yeah, I to be honest, I think it makes it more exciting. I think that we continue to perfect our craft by having these tools that are available. And some of the tools, also keep in mind, make the sport safer, right? Or have the potential to make the sport safer. Listen, I'm biased because I'm the data guy, and I want to continue to innovate in the sport and see more of this stuff be developed. But to me, it makes it more exciting because there's more things to talk about. There's more things that the general cyclist can connect with, because if they're seeing data talked about say aerodynamics or power to drag or things like that, there's an opportunity for them to go and experience it and there's because if it was just about riding the Tour de France, like they're never going to experience that unless maybe they could go ride some of the finishing climbs and circuits and stuff like that. But it kind of, to me, it adds another level of excitement. But keep in mind that there always should be some art around it and how you use those tools, just like any profession, really.
So now we talked about so much science in cycling, but you were also a part in a very scientific project in, track and field or running, the 1.59 project. So you were part of a team that broke the 2-hour timeline, right? And just for our viewers to understand better, in order to run a marathon in 2 hours or less, that's 21 kilometers an hour average. Honestly, Bobby and me, we struggle to keep that on a bike. Average, yeah. Right, Bobby? 21 kilometers an hour average for 2 hours. I got to work hard to make it. So, fill us in a little bit. They already were able to run a 2:05, a 2:04 beforehand. But What did you change? How did you make them run that just a little bit faster?
Yeah, so the world record was 2:01:39, and Eliud Kipchoge, who is the runner who went under 2, he held that record. And this the first attempt was in 2017. Nike had decided to go for it's always been a benchmark that people have been trying to achieve, like the 4-minute mile. And so Nike decided to put together a project in 2017 called Breaking 2. I was really fortunate to get invited to be a part of that project. There was 5 of us of the core kind of scientists and engineers that got to work on that. We put together, like, where are we going to do it in the world? What should the course look like? What should the weather conditions be? What should the pacing strategy be? How can we run off of, with other pacers and runners to help with aerodynamics and drag? What clothing should they wear? Shoes should they wear? What's the nutrition? And all that same type of things that you would try to optimize for a bike race, only we got to choose the location, the time, and the location and the time that we wanted to do it. So in 2017, we missed it by 26 seconds. So Eliud finished in 2 hours and 25 seconds. I never thought I was going to be part of a project again like that. 2019 rolls around. I had left the sport of cycling and running completely. I was working on autonomous vehicles. I never thought I was going to be back working on anything in endurance sports. And I'm in the NICU because her son's born. He was there for 67 days. And I'm just texting back and forth with Dave Brailsford because I'm like trying to find an outlet there, and I think the tour was during the Giro or something, and we were talking about, I think it was with Froome when Froome won that year. And so long story short, the Sky was going out as a sponsor, and they were looking for somebody to buy the team. David found somebody to buy the team, but it was Ineos with Jim Ratcliffe, and Jim said, hey, buy the team, but you also have to do this running project. Dave's like, yeah, sure, but knew nothing about running. So naturally, I was the only person that he knew that was involved in anything like that, which is the exact same project, to be honest. And he's like, Robby, can you do this? And I was like, absolutely, here we go. And my involvement in the 159 challenge, which was under different sponsorship and leadership than the Breaking 2 with Nike, completely separate, was completely different. I was working on aerodynamics and the weather for Breaking 2 in 2017. I got to work on all the projects in 2019. So I got to design the course, got to choose the location, got to put weather stations up that were tracking the weather so that we could have like really hyper forecasting neural networks that were going to tell us when we should run the race. We had a company that we use for CFD analysis, and we were running hundreds of hours of CFD to try to find the arrow formation that we came up with that I alluded to earlier. And there was one part of it that not a lot of people know is a marathon course is 42. It's a marathon course is 26.2 miles, right? And but to measure it, they use this like medieval device that's called a Jones. I call it a medieval device, but it's like this old device that sits on a bike, and a course measure will come and it ticks over like mechanically to measure this distance.
Yeah, I've seen them. Have seen them. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
I have one in my garage right now because I have the bike that we use to measure this distance and ratify the course. When I saw that, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute here. I go, so what happens when you calibrate this thing and it's off? And it turns out that they know that the tolerance of this thing is, and the error of this thing is 1 meter per kilometer. So, and 42.195 kilometers, you can have plus or minus 42 meters when you measure the distance. So what they do is they add 42 meters onto the course. But if you had already over measured by 42, now you're up to 84 meters. It could be wrong. Not likely, but it could be too long of a course by 84 meters. And when you're talking about 26 seconds that we missed it last time, I'm like, whoa, we need to find out a better way to do this. So most of my time, I spent 80% of my time in Vienna that year. And most of my time was we were remapping the course, and we used LiDAR to create a 3D mesh of the course that we wanted to use. And then we had to find a way to use differential GPS to map that physically onto the road. And then we would continue to learn things. And I had this crew that would go out with me that would remap it to the road every time that we would make an update to it. And literally they were like, come on again, because they didn't really understand why it was so important. And I would sit over top of them and look and make sure that they're getting these differential GPS poles exactly where they needed to be. And they spoke German and I spoke English, and like I thought they were my friends. I don't think they really liked me, but at the end of the day, we were able to get the course to be 42.195 kilometers plus or minus 10 centimeters. And so we were able to get spot on.
A quick question. Did you actually, for the race, draw a line where Kipchoge had to run to make sure he takes the precise, shortest way?
Yes. It was somewhat of a mistake because we created what was kind of like a goat path for him. And turns out if he had stepped 1 foot on the line, he was disqualified. And because of that, we optimized, and he was doing circuits, and we had optimized the course so perfect that now that because he was worried about putting a foot on the line, he wasn't running exactly on it. So he ran more than the course distance, because around the curves he was like off by a meter from what the optimal line was, and that added distance around. So there are a lot of things that, like, on the day you're like, wow, it's not how I thought it was going to go. But we were able to get him under 2 hours. He did it in 1:59:40.2.
So what you're saying is, and I think our viewers and our listeners can deduct this themselves, that you're actually the reason why Mr. Kipchoge broke this record in the first place. But like you said, using LiDAR technology, you know, all the time and effort that you put into this on a specific circuit. You know, back in 2023, Kelvin Kiptum from Kenya ran the Chicago Marathon, and he did it in 2 hours and 35 seconds on, you know, without all the bells and whistles that, or the support that you gave the 1:59 challenge, right? Are we going to see a marathoner in the near future go under 2 hours on a normal course?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope there are things that we learned that helped that along too, because that was the whole point of it. You know, we didn't just do it so that we could be the first ones to do it. We did it so that we could move the sport forward. And it's just like when you saw somebody break the 4-minute mile, then it all, more people started to do it. And hopefully there's some learnings that were applied when he ran in Chicago. I'm sure that we will see it. It's just a matter of when.
Okay. Why my last question? Short answer, you might just laugh. I'm 52 years old now, and I was a pretty good, solid rider back in my days. If I have a comeback tomorrow, can you make me top 10 next year Tour de France? Not in 10 days, but next year, 365 days from now. Can you and me working together every day, can you make me top 10 in the Tour de France next year? What do you say to that?
Do you still have the ability to say shut up, legs?
That's a good answer. I guess I can dig that somehow. I can dig it still out. Yes, my friend.
Then we can do it.
Awesome. Alrighty.
I think, Yenzi, now I think we've figured out your secret for being such a great cyclist. Was you were always in the breakaway, so you were always cooling yourself.
Yeah, right?
So yeah, put that into your training regimen for old Jens, Robby. Because, I don't know many people that had more breakaway kilometers than old Yenzi here. But now we know that he was just trying to stay cool. He wasn't trying to win races.
He knew what he was doing.
Trying to stay cool.
Yep.
Hey, Robby, thanks a million for being our guest. It was super interesting. I actually did learn a lot of new things. I hope I understand most of it, to be honest. But it was fantastic to have you as our guest, Robby. And hopefully, with some more future project, we can have you back as our guest maybe next year, same time. And we check on you. What are you up for in the years to come? Thanks a million for being our guest.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys. This was fun.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. There will be loads more content popping up here, including more great interviews with top guests like Robby. Keep dropping your questions for us in the comments, and check our description below to find us on social media and Patreon to support the channel.